In 1958, a single aircraft held the world records for speed, altitude, and time to climb, all at the same moment. No airplane had ever done that before. The Lockheed F-104 Starfighter could fly at twice the speed of sound, climb past 100,000 feet, and it looked less like a fighter than like a rocket with a cockpit bolted onto the side. Test pilots called it the missile with a man in it, and they meant it as praise. Now, here is the strange part. Barely 10 years later, in the skies over West Germany, that same record-setting machine had a very different name. The men who flew it called it the Widowmaker. In English, the Widowmaker. Out of 916 starfighters the West German Air Force bought, 292 of them crashed and 116 pilots died. So what went wrong? Was the F-104 simply a bad airplane, or did intelligent people take a brilliant machine and ask it to do something it was never built for? That is the real story here, and it is far stranger than the legend. To understand the Starfighter, you have to go back to the skies over Korea in the early 1950s. American pilots flying the F-86 Sabre kept running into the Soviet-built MiG-15, and they did not like what they found. The MiG could climb faster and fight higher than the Sabre, and in a war fought near the edge of the atmosphere, that mattered a great deal. In 1951, Lockheed's chief designer, a man named Clarence Johnson, better known to everyone as Kelly, flew to Korea himself and sat down with the pilots. He asked them a simple question. What is it you actually want? Their answer was almost unanimous. They wanted something faster, something that climbed harder, something that could get up high and get there in a hurry. Everything else was secondary. Now, most engineers at the time were moving in the opposite direction, building heavier fighters loaded with radar and fuel and weapons. Johnson went the other way entirely. Back at Lockheed's Skunk Works in California, the same secret workshop that would later build the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird, he wrapped the smallest possible airframe around the biggest engine he could find. The result took to the air for the first time in 1954. The wings tell you everything about the philosophy. Each one was tiny, thin as a blade, only about 7 feet long from the fuselage to the tip. And the leading edges were so sharp that ground crews kept slicing their hands open on them. Lockheed eventually had to fit protective covers over the wings whenever the aircraft was parked on the ramp. Think about that for a second. Here was a fighter so sharp it was a hazard to its own mechanics before it ever came near an enemy. To be fair to Johnson, every one of these choices was reasonable. He was solving the exact problem the Korean pilots had handed him. If you want speed and altitude above all else, you shave off weight, you shrink the wings, and you accept that the airplane is going to be a handful to fly. He was not being reckless. He was being disciplined. Before we get to how this machine earned its terrible reputation, you need to see what it could do, because those records are what make the tragedy so hard to explain. If this kind of story is why you're here, take a second to subscribe. It only gets stranger. So what could it do? In the spring of 1958, the F-104 rewrote the record books. It became the first aircraft to hold the world records for speed, altitude, and time to climb all at once. It was the first production airplane to reach Mach 2, twice the speed of sound, and it was the first aircraft to climb past 100,000 feet under its own power, high enough that the sky above it turned black and a pilot could begin to see the curve of the Earth. The following year, a Starfighter pushed the altitude record beyond 103,000 feet. The heart of all this was the General Electric J-79 engine, a slender turbojet that could shove the little airframe forward faster than almost anything else in the sky. Kelly Johnson was awarded the Collier Trophy in 1958, American aviation's highest honor, sharing it with General Electric and the Air Force. The Starfighter was also the first fighter to carry the M61 Vulcan cannon, a rotary gun that could pour out thousands of rounds a minute. On paper, and in the air, this was the most advanced interceptor in the world. And yet, the United States Air Force fell out of love with it almost immediately. Here is why. All that obsession with speed and climb came at a cost. The Starfighter had very short legs, which is another way of saying it could not carry much fuel and could not stay airborne for long. Those tiny wings were superb at Mach 2 in a straight line, but they were poor at turning. Kelly Johnson admitted it himself. In a dogfight, the F-104 could out-accelerate and out-climb its rivals, but it simply could not turn with them. For an interceptor built to sprint at a target and fire, that was an acceptable trade. For a fighter meant to twist and maneuver, it was a real weakness. So the Air Force bought only a few hundred, used them for a short time, and moved on to other aircraft. And that raises the obvious question. If America was quietly walking away from the Starfighter, how on earth did that very same airplane end up as the backbone of half of NATO? Before we cross the Atlantic, there is one more piece of engineering you need to understand, because it tells you just how hard this airplane was to get right. It is the ejection seat. On most fighters, the seat fires upward. You pull the handle, a rocket shoots you out of the top of the cockpit, and your parachute opens. Simple enough. But the Starfighter had a tall tail, and it flew so fast that engineers were genuinely worried an upward-firing seat would slam the pilot straight into the tail fin at hundreds of miles an hour. So they made a bold call. On the early Starfighters, the seat fired downward, ejecting the pilot out of the belly of the aircraft, away from the tail. Now, you can probably already see the problem. Firing downward works beautifully at high altitude, where you have plenty of sky beneath you. But if the engine quits on takeoff or landing, when the aircraft is only a few hundred feet off the ground, firing the pilot downward means firing him straight into the runway. There is no time for the parachute to open. That is not a theory. Around 21 American pilots died in low-level emergencies because their seats sent them the wrong way. One of them was Ivan Kinchelow, one of the most respected test pilots in the country, a man who had already been selected for America's space program. In July of 1958, his engine failed shortly after takeoff at Edwards Air Force Base in California. His seat fired him toward the ground, and he was killed. There is a small, grim detail I have always found telling. To keep a pilot's legs from flailing during a high-speed ejection, the seat had spurs that clipped his boots to the footrest, which is why F-104 crews sometimes called themselves cowboys. Lockheed eventually switched to an upward-firing seat that could clear the tail, but even that version had real limits close to the ground. Solving one danger had quietly created another. Keep that pattern in mind, because it is about to repeat itself on a much larger scale. Which brings us to West Germany. In the late 1950s, the young West German Air Force, rebuilt only a few years after the war, needed a modern jet. Not just an interceptor, but an aircraft that could do everything. It had to strike targets on the ground, fly reconnaissance, and defend the skies, often at low altitude, and often in the miserable weather of Northern Europe. It was one of the largest military contracts of the era, and it came to be known as the deal of the century. Lockheed won it, but to win it, the Starfighter had to change. The version Germany received, the F-104G, with the G standing for Germany, was a very different animal from the sleek record setter. Engineers strengthened the airframe, added heavier radar and equipment for all-weather flying, and hung external fuel tanks under the wings so the jet could actually reach its targets. All of that piled on roughly 2,000 pounds of extra weight, and yet the aircraft kept the very same engine as before. You might think a couple thousand extra pounds would hardly matter on a jet this fast, but think about what it actually meant. You have an airplane designed around a single idea, flying fast and high in clear skies. And now you have loaded it down, bolted equipment all over it, and ordered it to fly low and slow through fog and rain. Those tiny wings that were so brilliant at 50,000 feet suddenly had to haul a much heavier aircraft close to the ground, where there is no room for a mistake. It is a little like taking a thoroughbred racehorse, bred purely for speed on a smooth track, and putting it to work pulling a plow through a muddy field in a storm. The animal is not defective. You have simply asked it to do the one thing it was never built for. And there was a human side to this as well. Many of the young German pilots were stepping almost directly from slow, forgiving propeller trainers into a Mach 2 jet with the gliding qualities of a thrown brick. In those early years, they did not yet have the flight hours or the experience the airplane demanded of them. On top of that, the J-79 engine, so magnificent up at altitude, had a habit of flaming out, and an engine failure at low level in bad weather often left no time at all to recover. None of the people making these decisions were fools. NATO wanted a single capable aircraft it could build and share across many nations. The Germans needed exactly that capability, and they needed it at a price they could afford. Every choice made sense on its own. Put them all together, though, and you had a recipe for disaster. The disaster arrived quickly. In June of 1962, 4 starfighters were flying in formation, practicing for a ceremony to mark the type's entry into service. All 4 crashed. All 4 pilots died. It was a horrifying way to introduce an airplane, and it turned out to be only the beginning. The crashes kept coming, month after month, year after year. By the middle of 1966, 61 German starfighters had gone down, and 35 pilots were dead. The German public was watching all of this unfold in real time. Newspapers began printing running tallies of the wrecks, like a grim scoreboard nobody wanted to keep. The airplane collected its nicknames: the Widowmaker, the Flying Coffin. Pilots told a dark joke that the surest way to get your own starfighter was to buy a small field and simply wait for one to arrive. This became a national scandal, known in Germany as the Starfighter Crise, the Starfighter Crisis, and it reached the highest levels of the military. When the head of the Air Force, General Werner Panitsky, stated plainly that the whole purchase had been politically motivated rather than driven by the needs of his pilots, he was forced to resign for saying it out loud. His replacement understood the cost in a way few others could. His name was Johannes Steinhoff, a legendary fighter ace from the Second World War, a man whose own face still carried the scars of a wartime crash. Steinhoff did something dramatic. He grounded much of the starfighter fleet until the aircraft could be made safer, and one of the first fixes he pushed through was replacing those troublesome ejection seats with a British design from Martin Baker, a seat that could save a pilot even at 0 altitude and 0 speed. Slowly, the accident rate began to fall. But the final numbers were sobering. Of the 916 starfighters Germany operated, 292 were lost, roughly 1 in 3, and 116 pilots never came home. That is the toll that gave the Widowmaker its name. And then, more than a decade later, the story took one last turn, one that had nothing to do with engineering at all. In 1976, a committee of the United States Senate uncovered something remarkable. Lockheed, it turned out, had paid around $22 million in bribes to foreign officials to help sell its aircraft around the world, the Starfighter very much included. The revelations rippled across several countries at once. In the Netherlands, the trail led to Prince Bernhard, the husband of the Dutch Queen, who had accepted a payment of $1.1 million to help steer a fighter contract toward Lockheed. The scandal nearly brought down the Dutch monarchy. Queen Juliana reportedly threatened to abdicate the throne if her husband were put on trial. He was spared, but he was stripped of his honorary military positions and forbidden from ever wearing his uniform again. For years he denied everything, and when a reporter once pressed him about it, he answered that he was above such things. In interviews published after his death in 2004, he finally admitted that he had taken the money. In West Germany, suspicion fell on Franz Josef Strauss, the defense minister who had championed the purchase, and on his political party. It was alleged they had received millions from Lockheed. Strauss denied it furiously and sued his accuser, and the claims were never actually proven in court. Interestingly, and perhaps conveniently, the German ministry's own documents about the Starfighter purchase had been destroyed years earlier, back in 1962. Lockheed itself nearly collapsed under the weight of the scandal, but the most lasting consequence reached far beyond one company. The outrage over these bribes led directly to a new American law in 1977, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which made it a crime for United States companies to bribe foreign officials. It remains one of the most important pieces of anti-corruption law anywhere in the world, and it exists in large part because of this airplane. So let us come back to the question we started with. Was the F-104 Starfighter a bad airplane? The honest answer is no, and the proof is in the record itself. The very same jet, flown by other nations in the role it was actually designed for, as a fast, high-altitude interceptor in clear skies, went on to serve for decades with a far better safety record. Even Germany's own numbers improved dramatically once the seats were fixed and the pilots gained the hours they needed. The Starfighter did its original job superbly. What broke was the match between the aircraft and the mission. And that is the real lesson here, the one that outlasts the Cold War itself. Great engineering is always built around a purpose. Kelly Johnson designed a razor, and for the work of a razor, it was close to perfect. The tragedy came when people in boardrooms and defense ministries decided that a razor could also be a hammer, and when the true cost of that decision came due, it was paid by young pilots and their families, not by the men who signed the contracts. The Widowmaker, in the end, was never really the airplane. It was the mission we forced it to fly. If you found this story worth your time, do me a favor and subscribe, because next time I want to take you inside another Cold War machine that looked like a triumph on paper and hid a much darker story underneath the surface. You will not want to miss that one. I will see you there.